Inzoe is releasing in 2 weeks. That is on the 28th of March in early access, and they have now officially released a graphics comparison video by system specs. You can see that running here in the background. And I would say we are talking about the specs you need to at least run the game. And then we talk a little bit about the recommended settings. And then we have to talk about some of those settings because they don't necessarily always add up, and there are still quite a bit of question marks I have when it comes to those technical specs. But let's talk about the most important part first. What do you need to at least run this game? So the game is running on Unreal Engine 5, but before you're panicking, the minimum requirements look pretty good. You need at least Windows 10 or 11 in 64-bit, which is pretty much standard nowadays. As a CPU, you need an Intel i5 10400 or Ryzen 5 3600. You need 12 GB of RAM, and you need a GeForce RTX 2060 or Radeon RX 5600 XT. You also need an internet connection, and you need at least 40 GB of storage. Now, this is pretty good. Like, I would say this is a pretty decent requirement for a game. Now, unfortunately, we do not know what this means in resolution. Do you have to use an upscaler even, or what are exactly the graphic requirements? You can see it here in the background with the video. It doesn't look too good, especially when you are trying to look at the characters. I would even go so far to say that we are looking here at 720p, which would be pretty bad even for a minimum requirement. But hey, at least you can play the game, right? So it's all right. Then we have the medium requirements. And medium requirements are already needing an Intel i7 11700 or Ryzen 7 5800 X3D, 16 GB of RAM, a GeForce 3060 or Radeon 6600, and 50 GB on your storage, which is quite a bit of an increase already. And again, we don't know what the resolution here is. I assume this is 1080p, and they are not using Lumen, aka ray tracing yet. Normally, this is coming when they are going to higher settings, which is probably recommended. I assume that recommended is 4040p. And you need an Intel i7 12700K or Ryzen 7 7800 X3D, 16 GB of RAM, a 3070 as a GPU, or Radeon 6800 XT, and 16 GB on your storage. And if you want to play this game on high, which I assume is 4K, you need an Intel i7 14700K, a Ryzen 7 9800 X3D, 32 GB of RAM, a GeForce 4080, or an RX 7900 XTX, and 75 GB on your storage. Now, as I said, I have some issues with the processors. Like, we have two options here with the processor requirements. The first one is this is not really optimized yet, and they still have some work to do. That would be the worst case scenario. Or the second one is this is a typical, probably the developers run the game mostly on Intel, and they don't really know what the Ryzen equivalent is, because if I'm seeing some of the comparisons and they are jumping from a 3600 to a 5800 X3D. From that, they are jumping to a 7800 X3D. And then on high settings, they are literally asking for the best gaming CPU available right now. Till in a few days, the new AMDs coming out, which are even better. But it's like, what? That's a bit much. Like a 9800 X3D is like, again, the best gaming CPU you can get right now. So to compare that This happened in the past quite often with developers where Intel was always the king. And so some developers didn't really know what is exactly the requirement or the comparison. So they just choose like the highest CPU in a certain ranking without even testing or without really doing a comparison. I hope that's the case here because, again, those jumps are kind of insane. And even if you were going higher in the resolution, that doesn't really add up. So it will be probably a mix of all those things. Like A, it's early access. B, it's Unreal Engine. Some developers have some issues with the engine for a while now, and then of course, like maybe they don't know the comparison. But it's really hard to assess the situation. I have to make this very clear when you don't really know what those settings are exactly they are showcasing here and what those comparisons are. Like, again, I very much assume that high requirements is 4K while recommended is 4040p. So we will see about that when the game is coming out in 2 weeks, but at least you will have a pretty good idea about if you can even run this game. And of course, over the course of early access, it will probably further improve. With that said, we are at the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please consider to leave a like. And also, if you're new to the channel, you want to see more InZOE videos or strategy management games in general, that's what we are focusing on here, then I would appreciate if you also maybe subscribe. With that said, thank you so much for watching. Stay safe, and I'll see you next time.